a feast for crows. The stench of death hung heavy over King's Landing, a miasma of decay that clung to the streets and alleyways like a shroud. Cersei Lannister stood atop the Red Keep, her emerald eyes surveying the city below with a mixture of triumph and disgust. The war that had torn the Seven Kingdoms apart was over, or so it seemed, and House Lannister stood victorious. But victory, Cersei was learning, could be as bitter as defeat. "Your Grace," a voice interrupted her reverie. It was Grand Maester Pycelle, his chains clinking as he bowed. "The small council awaits." Cersei's lip curled in disdain. The small council, a group of sycophants and plotters, each with their own agenda. But they were necessary evils in the Game of Thrones. "Very well," she said, turning from the view. "Let us see what new disasters await us today." As she swept through the halls of the Red Keep, her crimson skirts rustling, Cersei's mind raced with plans and schemes. Her father, the great Tywin Lannister, was dead, slain by the imp, her own brother. With his death, the mantle of leadership had fallen to her, and she was determined to prove herself every bit as cunning and ruthless as the old lion had been. The small council chamber was thick with tension as Cersei took her seat at the head of the table. To her right sat Mace Tyrell, the oaf of Highgarden, puffed up with his own importance. To her left, Petyr Baelish, called Littlefinger, his gray-green eyes alight with barely concealed ambition. "Your Grace," Littlefinger began, his voice smooth as silk, "we have received troubling reports from the Iron Islands. It seems Euron Greyjoy has been crowned king, and his appetite for conquest is considerable." Cersei waved a hand dismissively. "Let the Ironborn reave and plunder. They will exhaust themselves soon enough, and then we will crush them." But even as the words left her mouth, a seed of doubt took root. The realm was weary of war, the Lannister forces stretched thin, and there were other threats to consider. The Targaryen girl across the narrow sea with her dragons, the unrest in Dorne, the eerie silence from the north. As the meeting droned on, Cersei found her thoughts drifting to her son, King Tommen. Still so young and malleable, she would need to shield him from the influences of others, particularly his wife, Margaery Tyrell. The Rose of Highgarden was proving to be a thorn in Cersei's side, her popularity with the small folk a threat to Lannister power. Miles away, in the canals of Braavos, another story was unfolding. Arya Stark, no longer the wild wolf girl of Winterfell, stood before the House of Black and White. The massive doors loomed before her, one white as weirwood, the other black as ebony. "Valar Morghulis," she whispered, the Braavosi words feeling strange on her tongue. The doors creaked open, revealing a hooded figure. "Valar Dohaeris," came the response. "You are here to serve?" Arya nodded, her hand instinctively going to needle the small sword. That was her last link to her old life, but she knew that to truly become no one, she would have to leave Arya Stark behind. With a deep breath, she stepped across the threshold into a world of shadows and secrets, of faces and death. In the Vale, high in the Eyrie, Sansa Stark, now known as Alayne Stone, was learning a different kind of game. Under the tutelage of Petyr Baelish, she was becoming adept at the art of manipulation and intrigue. "Always keep your foes confused," Littlefinger had told her. If they are never certain who you are, or what you want, they cannot know what you are like to do next. Sansa took these lessons to heart, even as she played the role of dutiful bastard daughter. But beneath the demure exterior, the wolf was awakening. She watched and learned, storing away every scrap of information, every whispered secret. The North remembered, and so did she. As autumn painted the vale in hues of gold and crimson, Sansa found herself at the center of Littlefinger's latest scheme. Young Lord Robert Arryn, sickly and unpredictable, was to be betrothed to Alayne. It was a dangerous game, but one that could potentially return Sansa to her rightful place as the Lady of Winterfell. "You must be careful, sweetling," Littlefinger warned her one evening, his breath smelling of mint. "The Game of Thrones is treacherous, and one false move could mean our ruin." Sansa met his gaze steadily. "I am a slow learner, it is true, but I learn." Meanwhile, in the Riverlands, a different kind of resurrection was taking place. Brienne of Tarth, the Maid of Tarth, continued her quest to find and protect the Stark girls. Her journey had led her through war-torn villages and desolate forests, each step bringing her closer to fulfilling her oath to the late Catelyn Stark. Accompanied by Podrick Payne, her loyal, if somewhat inept squire, Brienne followed whispers and rumors. But the trail seemed to grow colder with each passing day. "We'll find them, my lady," Podrick assured her as they made camp one night. "The Stark girls are out there somewhere." Brienne nodded, her hand resting on the hilt of Oathkeeper, the Valyrian steel sword, gifted to her by Jaime Lannister. "We must," she said softly, "for Lady Catelyn's sake and for theirs." But even as Brienne searched, darker forces were at work in the Riverlands. The Brotherhood without banners, once champions of the small folk, had taken a sinister turn under the leadership of Lady Stoneheart, the resurrected, vengeance-driven corpse of Catelyn Stark. In the Iron Islands, a king's moot had crowned Euron Greyjoy as king. The one-eyed pirate, known as Crow's Eye, had grand ambitions that extended far beyond the rocky shores of his home. "We are Ironborn," Euron proclaimed to his people, his voice carrying over the crash of waves. "We once ruled all the lands the waves touched. We can do so again with the dragons that are in the east." His words ignited a fire in the hearts of the Ironborn, long accustomed to being looked down upon by the mainlanders. Under Euron's leadership, long ships set sail, their dragon-headed prows cutting through the waves as they sought conquest and glory. Far to the south, in Dorne, the sand snakes seethed with the desire for vengeance. The death of their father, Oberyn Martell, at the hands of the Mountain, had awakened a bloodlust that threatened to plunge the realm into yet another war. Prince Doran Martell, cautious and calculating, sought to temper their rage. But even he had plans within plans. A long game that had been years in the making. Vengeance, he told his daughter Arianne, justice, fire and blood. "I am not blind, nor deaf. I know you all want war. But we are no Aegon the Conqueror." Yet even as he spoke of caution, Doran's own plans were set in motion. A marriage alliance, long in the making, that could change the balance of power in all of Westeros. In Oldtown, the oldest city in Westeros, another player entered the game. Samwell Tarly, once the craven son of a noble house, now a brother of the Night's Watch, arrived to train as a maester, but his mission was far more crucial than mere study. The citadel, with its vast library and ancient knowledge, might hold the key to defeating the others, the true threat that loomed beyond the wall. As Sam pored over dusty tomes and cryptic scrolls, he knew that the fate of the realm might rest on what he discovered. "The others are real," he muttered to himself as he worked late into the night, "and only knowledge can defeat them." But the citadel had its own secrets, its own agendas. The archmaesters, set in their ways, were reluctant to believe in tales of ice demons and the walking dead. Sam would have to navigate a different kind of battlefield, one of ideas and ancient prejudices. As A Feast for Crows unfolded, the landscape of Westeros continued to shift and change. Old alliances crumbled, new ones formed in their place. The Game of Thrones had become more complex, more deadly than ever before. Cersei, drunk on power and paranoia, saw enemies in every shadow. Her rule became increasingly erratic, her decisions driven by spite and fear rather than wisdom. The Faith Militant, a radical religious movement, gained strength in the capital, their barefoot soldiers a thorn in the side of the nobility. In the Reach, House Tyrell maneuvered for greater influence. Margaery, the young queen, charmed the small folk and courtiers alike, her popularity a direct threat to Cersei's power. The rivalry between Rose and Lyon threatened to tear the fragile peace apart. Jaime Lannister, sent to deal with the remnants of war in the Riverlands, found himself questioning his loyalties and his very identity. Without his sword hand, he was forced to rely on his wits rather than his blade. It was a transformation that would have far-reaching consequences. As he stood on the battlements of Riverrun, negotiating the castle's surrender, Jaime reflected on how far he had come from the arrogant knight who had pushed a child from a tower. "The war is over," he told Brynden Tully, the Blackfish. "Why sacrifice more lives needlessly?" The Blackfish's response was as hard as the man himself. "Is it a Lannister who speaks of needless death? You, who pushed my great-nephew from a tower? You, who stood by as your bastard son ordered my niece's husband beheaded?" Jaime had no answer. The weight of his past deeds hung heavy upon him, a burden he was only now beginning to understand. As the story progressed, the absence of certain key players was keenly felt. Tyrion Lannister, having fled across the narrow sea after killing his father, was notably missing from the narrative. His sharp wit and political acumen left a void in King's Landing that none could fill.